Welcome back to FM Live. This is the garage here at the shop. Today, we're going to talk about turbo kits because, of course, I like boost. Today we're going to cover the BBR Stage 1 turbo kit. So this is just for the ND1, specifically the 2016 through 2018 models. To kind of get into it a little bit, just to tell you what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about parts of the kit, what makes it up, what it fits on, some of the specifications of the kit itself. We'll talk about why it's a good kit for this particular engine and this platform, and then we'll answer some more questions at the very end. We actually have a whole list of questions, so thank you in advance for all those that asked some questions on social media. That way we have a lot more to talk about today. So if you have any questions about any of this that we talk about that is not covered in the video, or that we get to the questions at the end, feel free to post them down in the comments and we will answer them as we get to that Q&A section towards the end of the video. Thanks again for joining us. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. So as I mentioned, this is the BBR Stage 1 turbo kit that we're going to talk about. And this turbo kit is a fairly simple way to add about 55, 60 horsepower at the wheels and about the same amount of pound-feet of torque to your Miata. And it's a really straightforward way to do it. Doesn't take a lot of time or effort. It's a lot simpler to bolt it on than it has been for like the NA, NB, and even some of the NC forced induction options. So why would we want to do this kit, and specifically why did we go with BBR? Well, fortunately, BBR has already been in the game with Miatas or MX-5s in the UK for about as long as we've been doing Miata stuff over here in the US. And they beat us to the punch a little bit with their turbo kit. And when it came out, we saw all the quality parts and we thought, why reinvent the wheel? We ordered one of their kits and got it over here, installed it on one of our test cars, tried it out, made a few little tweaks to make it appropriate for right-hand or left-hand drive rather than right-hand drive like it is in the UK, and found out that it's pretty awesome. It is a great little piece of kit. It's something that if you're looking to do, you feel like the car's pokey, but it's not really quite as peppy as you'd hoping for, you know, as not a Mustang or Corvette killer, the new stuff anyway, but you want it to be something that can be keeping up with modern day minivans and Corollas, that kind of stuff, you know. This is what you want. It's a really great kit for adding a little bit of poke to the car without doing anything major. So what about this kit is special? Let's talk about that. Obviously, I've got some parts in front of me. Let's actually talk about some of the parts as they're on the engine and on the car. So I'll step over to the side here and we'll talk about the turbocharger, because that's what most people want to talk about anyway, because that's the heart of the kit, right? So this particular turbocharger is a Garrett turbocharger. It's a TSX 3071R, and if you're familiar with the Garrett terminology, that is a relatively good-sized turbo if you want to make well over 300 horsepower. And you might be thinking, well, why would you use this turbocharger for this engine if you're only making about 200 horsepower or a little over 200 horsepower at the wheels? We'll get to that. Hold on. But this turbocharger is a bespoke turbocharger for the BBR Stage 1 turbo kits, and it's actually a twin scroll setup. I'll show you what it looks like so you can get a little bit better idea of it. Let me take off this real carbon fiber heat shield, let you take a look at the naughty bits. So, as you can see, this is a relatively large-sized turbocharger for a little 2-liter engine, but the beauty of this is that you can kind of see here, this is a twin scroll turbocharger, and that's part of the magic why it works so well on this particular engine. And the other part of it is that we're not asking it to work very hard. So this engine, okay, let's go ahead and talk about it. It's a 2-liter engine, and you say Mazda makes 145-ish horsepower at the wheels on a stock 2016 to 18 engine, and you think, okay, this big turbo, why is it a good match for it? It's got high compression. Over here in North America, we got the 13-to-1 compression ratio engine Over in the UK, they got a little bit higher. It's a 14-to-1 over in most other parts of the world, since they have better fuel for most of the other part of the world. But this particular turbocharger, because it flows so much air, even though we're not asking it to do a whole bunch, and because it's so efficient with the twin scroll setup, it actually works really well with that high compression ratio. So this turbo running at about 6.5, 7 pounds of boost with this engine combo can make about 55, 60 more horsepower at the wheels and still be efficient and still be a good match. It's not laggy at all, surprisingly. This turbo is almost fully spooled. Again, we're not asking it to do much, only 6.5, 7 PSI by about 3,000 RPM. And from there, you just ride this plateau of boost all the way up to redline. So it's a very linear feeling power delivery, much like you'd expect from superchargers. So the funny thing is that this actually is more efficient than most superchargers. It makes more power sooner than a lot of the superchargers that fit with this platform. So all in all, it's a pretty cool piece of kit. This turbo is a really good match for this engine for a lot of different reasons. To not beat a dead horse on this one, let's talk about some of the other components of the kit. We have a bespoke cast tubular manifold. You can kind of see it. It's a little bit tucked up because it's meant to be very tight and compact to fit in the engine bay. But it is a tubular style but cast manifold. So if you were to actually look at the inside, all of the manifold runners are very they're ported, and they're very trying to think of the right word. Flow efficient doesn't sound quite right, but it is something to where it's not just like a log style manifold. All the runners are designed to meet up at the two openings going into this twin scroll turbocharger to make it very efficient, and the flow is very unimpeded. Also, you can see with the downpipe here, this is what makes this kit carb legal. Yes, I said that. This is something you can run in all 50 states, and likely a lot of other parts of the world as well. This is the stock catalytic converter, and let me reach over here and I'll show you. This is a stock manifold and catalytic converter. And with these kits, there's a couple options, but basically you need to have a stock either takeoff of your engine or brand new catalytic converter that's added to your downpipe, and that's how we can keep the emission standards and get you the carb EO with this kit. So you can either have us send you the downpipe and you cut out your cat and have it welded in. We can also do it for you. So if you want to send in your manifold, we can cut it out, weld it into the downpipe, send it back. Or we can also sell you a brand new from Mazda catalytic converter. Comes as an assembly, but again, we cut it out, weld it into your downpipe, and send it to you, so that way it's just ready to bolt in. So you've got a few options there. But that's one of the trick things about this kit that makes it carb legal, is that we get to retain the factory catalytic converter, and that makes all of the emissions compliance officers at Carb happy. The other part of this that is pretty cool, and it's different actually from what you see on the stand here, is that all of the current kits now use molded silicone intercooler piping. So this is another pretty fancy feature that they used to have hard aluminum pipes like this, which work fine, but when you're installing them in the car and you're needing to fit them down past all of the different shapes and past all the engine bits and past the body bits, this is just so easy. You can fold it, twist it, whatever you need to do, and it's very robust. You can actually see that there are layers in there, so it's Nomex reinforced. And this is something that is obviously designed for boost. It won't expand. It won't get blown out under boost pressure. It's designed specifically for this kind of an application. Likewise, another very specific part of the kit is the intercooler. And you can see that this intercooler, although it's relatively small and narrow, for these power levels and for the fitment in the car, is very easy, works very well, very efficient actually for what it is. And it bolts right up. Got the flanges on there. You don't have to worry about doing anything custom. This whole kit is engineered to where it's more or less all bolt-on. You don't have to really do much modification. So, that kind of covers a lot of the the really big parts of the kits. If you have questions about any of the specific hardware pieces, let us know. Drop us a comment. We'll answer it again at the end of the video. This kit, as I mentioned earlier, was something that we worked with BBR to do a little bit of development to make it suitable for left-hand drive vehicles after we decided that this is the kit we want to use. It's awesome. So we did a little bit of work with the BBR guys. They were really accommodating to help us out to make these particular parts for the left-hand drive applications. But they already did the bulk of the development. It was already pretty much a tried and true setup by the time we got our hands on it. So a lot of that development took place before us. We did a little bit more. We even did some more torture testing after we got our hands on the kit. It's turned out to be very reliable. There's been a few changes since we initially released the kit, such as going from the hard pipes to the silicone pipes and a few other small things. But overall, it's the same basic kit that we started with. So now that we've covered all the nerdy bits that you want to hear about the kit, what kind of power does it make? What kind of experience should you expect after installing this on your car? Basically, this is a bolt-on kit. Takes us about roughly 10 hours to install from beginning to end if you know what you're doing and have all your tools handy. This kit adds about 55 or 60 horsepower and about the same amount of pound-feet of torque to your engine without even doing anything to the internals. Same stock pistons, rods, camshafts, you name it. As long as you have a healthy engine, you can expect about a 55, 60 horsepower gain at the wheels. Usually the stock cars, you know, when we've dynoed them here, we usually get about 140, 145-ish horsepower, and that means that you end up somewhere around 200, sometimes a little bit over 200 horsepower, depending on your particular setup. This kit, depending on options, because there are some options that go with the catalytic converters, how you want us to do that. If you've already got your own EcuTech cable, that kind of stuff, you can save a bit of money depending on the way it's priced. But on options, you can go from about $58.49 up to $70.98 if you want to just get everything ready to go, bolted in now type of setup. Very straightforward, again, whatever option works better for you. But if you have questions about what way you want to do it or how things work, feel free to give us a call, send us an email, and we can kind of walk you through the specifics. Okay, I think that covers kind of the specifics of the kit. Let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions. So I'll start by some of the general questions that probably a lot of people have asked and that you may be thinking to yourself, what years does this kit fit? This is a 16 through 18 kit only. Unfortunately, there isn't a version that fits the ND2s or the 1920s and soon to be 21s. The reason being is that those cars have a different computer and the tuning is different. Unfortunately, we haven't cracked the code on that. We've been talking to a few other shops to see what might be available, as well as the BBR guys. They've done a little bit of investigation, and unfortunately at the moment it's not been a successful tune to get this setup or a similar turbo kit setup on the ND2s. Hopefully in the future, unfortunately we're kind of stuck until we get that part figured out. Another question that was asked was how many horses and torques? Again, that's around 200 horsepower and about 200 pound-feet of torque at the wheels, assuming that you've got everything dialed in and you've got a healthy engine. How difficult is the install? Again, about 10 hours is what we generally would do here. If it's your first time doing it, especially if you're not as familiar with the car, you'll probably want to budget for more time, but an experienced wrench turner that knows the car can get it done in about 10 hours. Do you need to do any welding for the install? No. Will we do an install video? We don't have plans for it at the moment. Our development car already has a turbo kit, so unfortunately we don't have any pending need to do another install here at the shop. That may change, we'll see. At the moment, we don't have an install video for this particular kit, although we do have some pretty good instructions on the website. What is the gas mileage that you get with this turbo setup? That depends a lot on your right foot. If you like to drive fast and you like to feel boost, and I'm not trying to shame you, I completely understand, your mileage could go down. However, if you're doing a lot of highway driving, you could get as good as, or maybe even slightly better fuel economy, because this will make the engine more efficient at those kinds of power levels. So when you need to accelerate, or if you're just cruising and you need to ramp into it a little bit, you could get a little bit more power without expending as much fuel, depending on how your right foot works. Again, there's no promises, but personally, I've seen 2 to 3 mile an hour or mile per gallon increase doing highway cruising with this kit if you're careful. Regards to the tune, does it come with an off-the-shelf map, or do we tune it even further? Can you tailor the tune to fit specific engines or tune from data logs? The answer is yes to all of that. You start off with a base tune. Whenever you buy this kit, we send you some information after you send us a screenshot to let us know what your ECU number and all that kind of jazz is. And we'll work with the BBR guys to send a base map back to you that is configured for your ECU. Mazda had a number of ECUs, so they're not all the same. So that first base map should get you going with the turbo kit after it's been installed. And then you'll take some data logs for us that'll show things like some idle behavior, some cruising behavior, some wind up and throttle runs. And once we see that data, we can make some intelligent choices on, okay, this needs a little bit here, a little bit less here, and adjust your map for you. And once we've done that tweak, we'll send the new map back to you. You'll upload it, go drive it, and we'll do it again until everybody's happy and the car is running well. It shouldn't take more than once or twice, usually. Generally speaking, the base maps at this point in time are really good. So a lot of people get the base maps, do some simple checks, and they're good to go. We may send a slight revision. So usually a pretty quick job. There is some time that needs to happen between sending the logs or the files back and forth, because we review it and BBR also has to review it and make the changes. So there's a little bit of a time delay. Next question is about oil catch cans, and will the Veris air oil separator work on this setup? Do you need to do a catch can? No. Is it a good idea? Yeah. And actually with this particular car, you can see that we do have one of the Veris oil catch cans. And it still fits. All of the necessary piping, plumbing, and fittings will still work just fine with that turbo kit. Really the only thing that changes is that this tube that comes over here to the pre-turbo intake would normally be over here for the stock air box. That's really the only difference as far as that air oil separator is concerned. But this is a good idea. You don't have to, but basically what it does is it prevents oil buildup from the crankcase going into the intake system and then getting deposited on the back of the intake valves. And one, being dirty is not super awesome, but over time that can decrease your compression, because it will increase the size of the deposits on the back of the valves over time, and they'll get built up and carbon and gunky, and it's not great. You'll have to do walnut blasting. If you want to see what a pain in the butt looks like, go look up walnut blasting on direct injection engines. Not super fun. So to avoid that as long as possible, an oil catch can or air oil separator setup is a good idea, especially on direct injection engines. Can the FM Hush-O-Matic muffler and the can controller be used with this turbo? Isn't the vacuum line shared? Yes, it is, and it depends on how you have your line set up that the Hush-O-Matic will work. So the short answer is yes. You could have it on a naturally aspirated car, you can have it on a turbo car, you can have it on a supercharged car. It just depends on where you're sourcing your vacuum for that Hush-O-Matic. And we actually have a pretty slick little setup over here on this turbo. You can actually see we have this solenoid. And this is what controls the Hush-O-Matic when you get it with the CAN control or CAN bus control unit. So it's on this side for the turbo cars because this is part of the same, it's hard to see because we've got lots of stuff tacked onto it, but it's part of the same vacuum line or brake booster line that you normally tie into over there if you had a naturally aspirated car. This is just on the other side of the check valve. There's a little check valve in the hose right here that if you have a turbo, you want to make sure that you're on the vacuum only side of the check valve for the operation of this solenoid, or even if you're running just a Hush-O-Matic without the CAN bus control, you'd be running on this side. So It's a little different. The routing for the hosing is a little bit different, but we've got the parts that you need for either version. So yes, it works great with the turbo, works great with the naturally aspirated setup. I live in a variable climate, and I am wondering if there are any steps needed to optimize the system for the up and down temperatures and for winterizing over the salty months. I assume that you're probably asking about boost pressures, because otherwise the turbo kit isn't really affected by temperature. It's something that as the weather gets cooler, air is denser, and so you won't need as much boost to hit the same overall pressure target that the engine is getting fed. So if you're working with a setup that is more or less open-ended on the boost like this, except for that you have a ceiling for maximum boost, it would be ideal to set your boost level when it's coldest, because that's the densest amount of air. So whenever you're driving the car when it's coolest, that's just as much pressure or available air density that's going to be shoved into the engine. When it gets hotter, that density goes down, of course, so your boost pressure will go down a little bit as well, but that's safer than running too much boost pressure when it's cold. So if you're concerned about that, or if you want to make sure that your boost pressure is set correctly, do some data logs, or if you've got a boost gauge installed, you can use that and verify that when the colder months come around that you're not going over the set limit. That should be something that's pretty clearly defined in the instructions, but if you have questions about that, let us know. I'd be happy to help you out. News about a Stage 2 turbo kit. So is there such thing as a Stage 2? We have a Stage 1. Why isn't there a Stage 2? Yeah, there is a Stage 2. It's not something that Flyin Miata currently offers. And basically that's because the Stage 2 version of this turbo kit is more or less all the same turbo parts, but you have to change out parts in your engine. It gets a lot more complicated. Basically, Stage 2 means that you're going for a lot more horsepower, and because the Stage 1 kit is topping out what the stock engine can put out safely without breaking, the Stage 2 kit requires pistons and rods and other things to make it all work. So it's something that you can do. It is out there. BBR does offer the components to be able to put together a Stage 2 version of this kit. We likely won't be offering it, or at least we aren't planning to offer it right now, because we try to focus on keeping as many of our components and kits as carb legal components and kits. We want to make sure that anybody that's driving around with our kits or our parts on their cars can be road legal here in the US. The emission standards for a lot of places are getting more and more stringent, so that's an important thing that we try to adhere to as much as we can, especially with new products. We want to try to future-proof that going forward as much as possible. So if you are interested in making 300 plus horsepower, I would recommend talking to the BBR guys directly, because they can help you with that, and they do have experience making quite a bit of horsepower with NDs if you would like to go that route. Lastly, on the general topic, and this is kind of a fun question, what happened to the twin-charged ND? And what that is that if you don't know, if you hadn't seen it, we posted a picture 2-3 years ago. It's been a while now, maybe even 4, that we had one of these turbo kits installed alongside on the same engine with an Edelbrock supercharger kit. And it looked cool. It fit actually surprisingly well for the mix mash of pieces that we were using. And we thought it was going to be kind of a cool thing just to see what reactions there were and what people thought. The short answer is that it was doomed from the beginning. It was never going to become a kit. This turbo kit, this turbo, is capable of way more horsepower than the stock engine can make. The supercharger made pretty much that same level of horsepower, about 200-ish horsepower at the wheels, which again is pretty much topping out what the stock engine can take. So putting them both on the same engine looks cool and sounds cool and all that kind of stuff, but you're not improving your efficiencies, you're not changing how much horsepower you can make ultimately. So it's not happening. Sorry, guys. Okay, so some questions about reliability. This has been a hot topic for a lot of people. So first question is it reliable? Yeah, it certainly is. This car behind me has had the kit on since late 16 or early 17, somewhere around that ballpark. And we've been just thrashing the car on and off the track. We've even handed it over to multiple automotive journalists. And if you don't know what an automotive journalist is, basically they're somebody who gets paid to roast your tires off. So needless to say, they're pretty rough on cars when they test drive them. And this car has just handled all of it in stride. Early on, there were some small component failures that are not included with the kit anymore, such as some of the earlier aluminum piping, that kind of stuff. And at this point in the game, it's all but figured out. They're very reliable. This one has done hours and hours and hours of track time. And that's all at the 200-ish horsepower level. Do you require any kind of upgrades to make this kit work with any other components on the car? Not really, surprisingly. And if you've ever been in the NA or NB Miata game for adding boost, you'd know you need a clutch, you need to upgrade your cooling system, yada, yada, yada. With NDs, it's pretty straightforward. You bolt on the boost and you go. The stock clutches are actually pretty strong. They work well. We would expect that they do wear out a little bit quicker than you would if it wasn't turbocharged or supercharged, but they seem to hold the power just fine. I would anticipate, especially if you're doing drag racing or launching or any kind of hard, aggressive track use, you probably would want to look at upgrading your clutch or changing it out sooner rather than later. But this car handled it with a stock clutch for a couple of years with no problems. The cooling system, Mazda did a great job with again, and the stock cooling system is actually pretty dang good. If you're tracking the car, we still would recommend, for reliability's sake, as far as, and also for efficiency's sake, to get an all aluminum radiator, to get some oil coolers for like your engine, maybe your transmission and differential if this is a hardcore track car. But for 90% or greater of most people wanting to put boost on their Miata, stock stuff is pretty good still. So overall, if your maintenance is kept up to date, engine's healthy, you can bolt on boost and go for most. What sort of steps must be taken after the install is complete to keep the system healthy long term? Change your oil, change your spark plugs, put gas in it. It's really not much different. Again, this system isn't really taxing a lot of the drivetrain as much as you might think. Normal maintenance is usually all it takes to keep this car going with the boost. So if you don't maintain your cars very well, maybe this is not a good way to do it, because more horsepower is only going to make that worse for you. But if you're keeping up your maintenance, you should be just fine. What kind of additional upgrades and maintenance do you recommend I install or replace prior to the turbo install to increase reliability / power? Again, for the reliability aspect, there's some things that you might do if it's a race car or track-specific car. Otherwise, the only thing that you might do to increase power at the same time as the turbo kit, if it's legal in your area, is to do our high-flow mid-pipe and cat. And that, in particular, in conjunction with the turbo kit, actually adds about 30 to 35 pound-feet of torque right in the meat of the rev range, right around 4,000, 4,500 RPM over the turbo kit. So if you can run an aftermarket high-flow cat and mid-pipe, that's definitely a good way to give yourself that little oomph right in the mid RPM range that you're normally driving in on the street. So that's an easy way to be able to do it. Other than that, there's not a whole bunch that you can do, because about 200-ish horsepower is the max at the high end, but you can bring that curve up a little bit sooner using that high-flow cat and mid-pipe. What sort of power levels can be expected when balancing power / reliability with any additional upgrades you recommend for daily driver / autocross? Same kind of thing. The top end is maxed out. You can't really go much further, because if you do, you're going to be bending rods, sending pistons out the side of the engine block, bad stuff. So that's limited. Your top end is capped on a stock engine. Again, the mid-pipe, it's a good upgrade. It's not going to change the reliability of it. It's going to raise the RPM. Basically, it's going to give you more area under the curve because it's going to give you more power sooner. It's going to allow that turbo to spool up a little bit quicker and just pile on that power even sooner than it would be with the stock mid-pipe. What is a more reliable 200 horsepower daily setup, turbo or supercharger? I don't know that we've blown up one of either one, so I don't think that there's a wrong or right answer to this. I know that there's definitely preference between both options, and a lot of people like turbos, a lot of people like superchargers, and they kind of live in these camps, and that makes them happy. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There are definitely some very solid options for both. So if you're not exceeding the 200 horsepower level with your engine, that's probably the most important part to keep it reliable, and assuming that you've got some good intelligent tuning happening with your ECU. That combination really is the most important part, because your engine doesn't know if it's a supercharger or a turbo that's been bolted on adding boost. It just sees the power, and that's ultimately what determines where your failure rate will be. Seems like we've got a question here on these lines. Kyle?
Well, I've got a couple questions. I don't know if you want to keep going with your list or break for...
If they're related to power specifically, go ahead. If they're not, I've got a couple more. It'll take me maybe 5 minutes to get through.
Wrap up that and then we'll go through all
Okay. All right. We'll cover what I have here. Just to kind of tack on to that turbo versus supercharger point, an interesting fact, when we did comparison for this turbo kit versus the Edelbrock supercharger kit, we actually found that this turbo makes power sooner, actually by about 3,000 RPM over the over the supercharger kit. In some areas and around 4,000 to 4,500 RPM, we were seeing increases of upwards of about 15 to 20 horsepower and torque in that range compared to the supercharger. It's a bit odd. I know a lot of people are used to the supercharger being a pretty quick and linear increase in power compared to a turbocharger, but we're talking about a very efficient turbocharger that actually is kind of reversing the roles here. So if you're looking to build power as soon as possible, this turbo kit actually does it with some to spare compared to some of the off-the-shelf superchargers that are out on the market now. What's the highest torque rating limit for the ND1 transmission with the BBR turbo, considering ND1 trans TSBs? This is a very popular and highly touchy subject online. If any of you have ever done digging on the forums or Facebook or whatever, everybody thinks that the ND1 transmissions are made of glass and they'll break just by looking at them. That's not necessarily true. There are certainly some instances out there where they have had problems. You know, it's ranged from end users like you and me driving it on the street that have went out for some fun and might have broken one. And there's also, of course, the racers that'll break them on the track that are driving them 10/10ths to get as much as out of them as they can. And that's certainly one thing. It's valid. There have been instances of it. But we have actually never broken an ND1 transmission here with our turbo cars for multiple years. We've tried multiple generations or iterations. Mazda has something like 4 or 5 iterations of that transmission, and the later they are, the stronger they're supposed to be, which is great. This car is a 16, and we used it with the stock transmission. It's got a different one in there now because we wanted to try a couple different options, but we haven't been able to break it. And again, we've handed it over to some automotive journalists that have been pretty hard on it. So is it a for sure thing that you're going to break a transmission or a differential? No, not really. If you're racing this car as a hardcore track car, you might want to consider having a plan B, because that might happen. But I think most people, if you're driving it on the street and you show some mechanical empathy when you're driving and shifting, you'll probably be just fine. How does the fueling cycle work on the Skyactiv engine? You say that it runs out of fuel at 200 horsepower. Will we ever offer a fuel system upgrade to push more power? That is true. We have seen some pretty odd fueling issues with the car when we tried to push it past 200 horsepower. And again, this is just with our car when we've tried to push it past 200 horsepower for testing purposes. And this is a direct injection engine, which it plays by different rules than a port injection system or even a throttle body injection system. It's a lot more to do with the piston shape as well as the charge area that's coming in, combined with how much fuel you can squirt in there and the timing for when that happens. So it's not just one factor, but the short story is that you're still limited to about 200 horsepower because of the horsepower level being dangerous to stock pistons and rods beyond that point. So will we ever offer an option to upgrade the fueling system? Probably not. Not unless for some reason we were able to do a carb legal version of the Stage 2 kit, which is unlikely, unfortunately. So if you want to go down that route, again, if you're chasing more than 200 horsepower, you're probably going to be looking at what the BBR guys have to offer for built engines, and they can help you out with that as well. They've got lots of information and lots of parts to help you go down that path. Thoughts for use with E85. It's great. We love E85. I don't think it'd be beneficial unless, again, you can raise that limit. Because at this fuel level, we're pretty much capping off where the engine is reliable. So if you can do E85 and you've got strengthened internals and you've got the right fuel injection or fuel system to accommodate for E85, it can be really cool. Will it be beneficial with a stock engine? Not really, unfortunately. Lastly, this is not really related to the turbo kit. Somebody asked, what do we think of the BBR Super 220 package for the ND2? In our experience, the Super 200 on the ND1 that we did do some dyno testing with made more power. It was more similar to the ND2 as far as it being able to raise the red line. Power came on, was a little bit stronger all the way and cleaner all the way out to red line. The 220 we actually haven't tried for the ND2. I would imagine you can see some similar gains, but remember, we don't generally have as good fuel octane at the pump here as they do in the UK, and we're dealing with a lower compression engine. They're 13-to-1 versus 14-to-1 over there. So we did not see the same power gains for that reason, and we also think there might be some differences between North American ECUs and European or Asian market ECUs as far as what Mazda did programming-wise. So it's probably a really fun package and would make the car feel perky, but I wouldn't expect the same power levels out of a North American car as what they're showing for theirs over in the UK. Okay, that was a lot of questions, and it sounds like we've got some more, but let's go ahead and take some questions from the audience and from the comments section below. Kyle, what do we have?
Is there any boost creep when going catless?
Boost creep when going catless. So, just as a note, we don't offer a catless version of this kit. They're all carb legal. So, as far as when we have testing, when we originally did the kit, and it didn't have a cat because the original version of it that wasn't carb legal didn't have a cat in the downpipe, I don't believe that we had any issues with boost creep. The wastegate on this turbo is a pretty large flapper. It's got a significantly larger diameter than what's in like the GT2560s that we use on the NAs and NBs. So no, I don't think we had any issues with boost creep, even with a higher flowing, less restrictive exhaust system. What else?
Is a blow-off valve recommended?
Is a blow-off valve, I can't speak, is a blow-off valve recommended? Yes, it's included with the kit, as a matter of fact. On this particular setup, it's actually a recirculating blow-off valve. It's not super flashy or fancy looking, but this is it. You've got your blow-off valve right here. Included, no drama, don't have to worry about tuning it or anything like that. It plugs up, it's good to go. It makes a fun kind of mechanical sound. It's real sudden. It doesn't sound like any other blow-off valve that I've heard on any Miata anyway. It's not that loud, it's actually pretty quiet, but it's kind of a fun mechanical sound. It's hard to describe. I like it. Anyway, yes. What else?
You've already addressed transmission reliability. Someone wants to ask your favorite question. Yeah, but how much does the kit weigh?
How much does the kit weigh? That is a fantastic question. and I don't know off the top of my head. I would guess that after you remove the stock components, you know, all the stock exhaust stuff, the stock intake stuff, maybe you'll be adding 25 pounds, 30 pounds, maybe, to the car. You know, the heaviest components are obviously going to be this bundle of joy right here, and then the intercooler, which is fairly small. You know, it's made of high-strength cast aluminum, but overall it's not very heavy, and it's pretty low mounted on the car, as you can see where the mouth of the vehicle is. Overall, would I worry about 25, 30 pounds for 55, 60 horsepower at the wheels? No, you can't feel it. Your right foot can do a lot more with this than if you saved 25, 30 pounds on a naturally aspirated car. What else do we have?
Isn't there a kit to put in an NC transmission?
There is a kit to put in an NC transmission, and we have it. So it doesn't include the transmission, but for those of you that are maybe racing hardcore or that want to go for 300 horsepower with this, you know, a stage 2 version of this kit, there is a way to do that. A lot of the guys doing that apparently in the UK are getting the 6-speed boxes from one of the later year NCs, and they use this adapter plate, which is literally just a plate with dual bolt patterns that will allow you to bolt up that NC transmission to an ND engine. And there's a few other components that you'll need as well. But check out our website. I believe it's the NC transmission adapter kit or something along those lines if you go shopping on the ND portion of our website. So yeah, if you're chasing down lots of horsepower, that's probably a good option. What else? Do we have anything else? Any other questions I haven't answered?
That's all that I have right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I have blathered on a lot today, so I apologize for all of that nonsense. Hopefully you learned some good information about the kit. If you still have questions or would like to talk about the kit for your car, maybe I didn't cover something pretty specific that you'd like to know, give us a call, send us an email, and we'd be happy to talk more about it. So thanks again. We sure appreciate it. If you would like to also, let's see, should I tell them, Travis, about the round excitement that we'll be expecting here soon? Sure. Okay. So we have some new wheels. If you haven't seen them yet, go to our website, flyinmiata.com/wheels. And check out the new options. They're not here just yet, but we've got a big floor space cleared out over on that side of the shop, just waiting for the new big shipment of wheels. And these are FM wheels, so they're not wheels that have been sold anywhere else before. We actually designed them and worked with the manufacturer to build them. So they're quite strong, they're light, they're designed just for Miatas. We made it a point to keep a lot of the brake fitment. So if you have one of our brake kits, these will fit over all of our brake kit options. Don't know if they'll work with some of the other ones, but let us know if you've got a favorite, and maybe we can get you some more information. But those should be coming in later this month. So head on over to the website, check it out if you haven't already. I strongly recommend it. They're one of the few options on the market at the moment that will be available in the sizes and offsets that work really well with Miatas. Other than that, thanks again. We'll sign up for now, and we will see you again this time next week, Thursday at 2 o'clock Mountain Time. We appreciate it. Keep on boosting.